Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the Quality of Life and Public Safety Committee meeting for today, September 15th, 2020. Thank you for joining us, and we are joined by, my name is Councilman PJ Clark, the co-chair and majority leader for the City Council and Quality of Life and Public Safety Committee. I'm joined by the co-chair, Councilman James Sanchez, and we also are joined by Councilman John Gale and Councilman Josh Mishtam. And we also have our two chiefs that are with us today as well, Chief Reggie Freeman and Chief Jason Thody. And our agenda is pretty simple today. Since we have no referred items, we're just going to have departmental updates by our Chief of Fire and Chief of Police and Councilman Gale.
I just want to recognize our superb council, Natalie Fiola-Guerreri, and our superb staff, Haley, who's also on board with us.
Thank you, sir. Our council executive assistant always is doing a great job for staffing the Quality of Life and Public Safety Committee, Haley Green Ortiz, and the phenomenal assistant Corporation Counsel, Natalie Fiola-Guerreri as well. So if any other points of privilege or recognition right now?
I'm good.
All right. With that said, thank you. We can go ahead with an update from our Chief of Fire, Chief Reggie Freeman.
Good afternoon, Mr. Councilman, and good afternoon to everyone who is joining us this evening. I just have a few things to update you on pertaining to the fire department. I will start with the cyber attack. Obviously, we all had to make some adjustments, and certain things warranted our immediate attention in response to the cyber attack. For us in the fire department, it was first assessing what damage was done. And for us, our records management system, it was all backed up by the servers. And because the server that the records management system was on, as well as the backup, were both impacted. Thankfully, we had backup systems ourselves here in the fire department, but the bad news is the latest version that we have backed up goes back to November 7, 2017. But that is progression, being that all of our information going back to 2008 originally was lost to present day. Now we are just shy of November 8th to present day in regards to our records management system. For payroll, our payroll was due today, so we did have members of the team in the office all weekend, myself included, just to make sure that they had all the assistance that they needed on Sunday to make sure payroll was properly submitted first thing Monday morning, and we were successful in that. So there should not be a delay on Friday with the members of the fire department being compensated. For our iDrive. So a lot of our information was shared on an iDrive, also known as a shared drive, which is on the city system. That also was impacted, and we have a backup on certain important folders that were on the shared drive, which I personally backed up June 10th of this year, which includes our administrative manual folder, which has all our department directives, all our department SOPs, all of our memorandums, and all of our department forms. So we have all of those, but our division heads, there was a lot of work that our division heads had done and kept on the shared drive that they currently do not have access to. For both the records management system as well as the shared drive, MHIS is still working with the National Guard to see if we can retrieve all of that data. So it's not that it is forever gone. Right now, we just don't have access to it, and the determination is still going to be made if we will ever see the full RMS system back up and running and all the data and information we had on our shared drive. I'll pause for any questions for any of that data or information that I just shared so far.
I just have a brief question, and I see you, Councilman Gale. Has there been any, it's unfortunate about the ransomware situation, virus attack, has it been indicated as to if the information that has been currently lost, a timeline as to when that will be retrieved, or what's the likelihood of it ever being retrieved and If it's not, what is that impact on the fire department and the city of Hartford, as well as the emergency management services as well?
Sure. So great question, sir. So for right now, it's yet to be determined if we will be able to retrieve that data on the fire side in regards to, say, fire investigations. We had the tragic fire at Charter Oak Apartments here early in the year, to where a citizen lost his life. And for that particular fire, the fire marshal's office took a lot of pictures. Well, all those pictures were on the shared drive, and you need pictures as well as other evidence, pieces of evidence for proper prosecution. And thankfully, we had shared our report with the state fire marshal's office, and the fire marshal who actually did the fire investigation for the Charter Oak fire had a separate file on their own personal device. But that's just an example of how serious it is for us to possibly lose some of the data. The only other fire that would be impacted would be the fire that we had at the auto salvage yard near Brainerd. So same scenario, we had that report, all of those pictures also forwarded to the state fire marshal's office. Both of these fires were deemed arson. And again, without any of the photos or the reports that the fire marshals had backed up or already sent to the state fire marshal's office, just to let you know how serious the circumstance is. By not having this information, all charges most likely would have been dropped if we didn't have those photos and those reports. But it has, again, it's not been determined yet that none of that information can be retrieved. It just has been confirmed that it can either.
Councilman Gale?
Yeah, Chief, and this question may be premature, and probably the same question would apply to Chief Thody and the rest of the city. But at this point, is there any consideration being given to having storage backed up on the cloud as opposed to in our own servers?
Yes, sir. I know for us, so we have as Chief Thody mentioned, an antiquated records management system with Firehouse. It was probably the first records management system offered to the fire service years ago, and there's much better services that are out there. So we recently, as of last year, we have signed up with emergency reporting. They have not only a server option, but also a cloud option. We will be transferring all of our records management system capabilities and duties over to emergency reporting within the next 30 days, where there is a cloud option. So it really depends on the actual company that you select, which makes a determination if they even have a cloud version. But in 2020, most companies do, if not all. You just pay a little bit more for the cloud service. And I don't know if Chief Thody wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, we've got a couple of applications here that are already cloud-based. Our Power DMS, which houses all of our policies and procedures and all the active work going into accreditation, is a cloud-based system and was not impacted. Our Evidencecom, as many council members probably remember, when we were going through the body-worn camera and in-car camera, request for proposal and deciding on a vendor, we went with Axon because they have Evidencecom, which is a nationally recognized cloud-based storage system that's been tested through courts and other places. So all of our body-worn camera, obviously the amount of important data that's collected by our body-worn cameras and by our in-car cameras is all safe and on the cloud as well. So those worked out well. And then on the other end of the spectrum, our records management system was a homegrown records management program written back in 1982 by a person that's still with us. So that was not impacted, mostly due to its age. So there's some benefits to having some older technology, I guess. Just kind of while we're on the subject, our impact at the PD was mostly access to the network. Like Chief Freeman said, he has an I drive, we have a P drive. It's the same thing. It's our network that we upload all of our crime scene photos and reports and everything to. Our network was updated more recently. We were looking at a gap between the last backup, if you will, of November, I'm sorry, not November, of September 2nd or 3rd to the 5th when we were actually notified of the ransomware attack. So we only had a couple days in there. The way we do a lot of our work here is that it's uploaded to the P drive over time. So our crime scene photos and things like that were also still available on the digital camera devices. So it doesn't appear as though we've lost anything. Still have some network access issues, which is mostly related, as Chief Freeman mentioned, I believe, to MHIS bringing us up on our networks again in a safe way. So they're scanning the networks, making sure there's no virus that still is on them, and then bringing these networks up kind of one at a time. So we don't have access to all of them. The one that allows us to scan and send documents is why you don't have the ComStat package, because that one's still impacted. We are now able to upload all of our stuff onto our P drive. We have full access to our P drive. There's also an issue with one of our camera networks, Milestone, which kind of controls our citywide cameras. They're all working and they're all recording, but our ability to access that video is being impacted, but they're working on fixing that now as well. Our scheduling system, Kronos, was impacted, but just our access to it. No data was lost, no data was corrupted. We just couldn't get into our scheduling system. We can now. So those are basically the impacts on the police department.
I have a question. Was there any personal information taken away by this ransomware?
We are being told no. As of now, we have the National Guard has come in with technicians. We have a private forensic group coming in with technicians. We have the state police and the FBI who have come in. They not only check to see if information came out, but they also scrub social media to see if there's anything being shared out there on the web, that would indicate that our information was compromised in the sense that stuff was downloaded or extracted. And they have not found anything to indicate that as of now, unless Chief Freeman knows something different.
Yeah, no, that's correct. That's the same information that I have.
And Chief Freeman, has this impacted the fire department as far as accreditation or loss of data for that accreditation?
No, sir. And that was actually one of the reasons why I did back up the files on June 10th of 2020, is because I wanted to make sure that we had all of our accreditation work, standards of coverage work, our self-assessment manual. So all of that data that we had to put together for accreditation, all of that is safe.
Thank you. I'd like to announce our Council President, Molly Rosado, just came on board. CJ?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I got a few other things, Mr. Councilman.
Yes, go right ahead, Chief.
Okay, and good evening, Madam President. Hope you're well. Transitioning into COVID-19, there have been no significant changes with the fire department's response for COVID-19. We still average roughly maybe 2 presumptive calls a day. That's been that way for the last month. As far as large unlawful gatherings that we were experiencing quite frequently going back a month and a half, 2 months ago, those have subsided, thankfully, to the coordination efforts between our police department and our citizens. We are literally texting our citizens, our restaurant owners, business owners, 11 o'clock, midnight, our property owners, various parts of the city, texting them on all times of day and night. So that partnership has been very effective. Last, for COVID-19, we are partnering with the Greater Hartford Arts Council for the dissemination of personal protective equipment for roughly 34 different arts agencies in the Hartford greater area. This has come from a grant that the Hartford Foundation has given the Arts Council to help supply personal protective equipment to our arts agencies. So we as the fire department, being that we have the experience of working with the dissemination of all the PPE to our business owners from the state, we are assisting them in that effort. So far, so good. We've had 2 meetings thus far, and the next step is going to be the procurement of the personal protective equipment. Media coverage. Recently, we had media coverage with NBC Connecticut that talks about our partnering with the Salvation Army to make sure that kids have toys underneath their Christmas tree this Christmas, and we challenge other fire departments to do the same across the state. So we're looking forward to doing that. And then last but not least, Breast Cancer Awareness Month is next month, and you will see your brave men and women in the Hartford Fire Department wearing pink on a regular basis next month. And that is my report.
Thank you, Chief. And any questions from my colleagues? And also, too, would like to, as Chief Freeman had mentioned, recognize Council President Mally Rosado for joining us. Councilman Gill.
Oh, you're on mute, Mr. Councilman.
Sorry, thank you. Chief, and I may have the numbers a little bit off, but if I'm not mistaken, last night we approved receipt of some grant money for the fire department to reimburse the fire department for PPE. I'm thinking the number was somewhere around the $170,000 or something like that. And I see the chair is shaking his head yes, so maybe I'm close to the right number. And just wondering how far that goes to actually covering the real costs that you had. Is it an adequate sum? Has it been more than enough that'll give you some leeway to continue to provide the PPE? Where do we stand with that?
Yes, sir. Great question. So that number, that was from the one of 2 federal grants we received in the last 45 days from FEMA, the reimbursement of COVID-19 related expenses. So that was roughly $173,000. That money that we have spent thus far for COVID-19, we have coordinated those efforts with Ms. Leon Rolls, and that money has come from the city's general fund, not necessarily one line item from the fire department. So all of that money, which we have tracked to the penny for everything that we have procured pertaining to COVID-19, which again, we're going to have to go back and possibly rebuild a portion of it because it was on the shared drive. That money was to reimburse the city for COVID-19 related expenses. So we're doing fine. We have 0 issue with our COVID-19 PPE at this time, Mr. Councilman.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
Yes, sir.
Chief, do we have a new class come? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I got you. New class?
Yes.
Yes, sir. So the application period ends on September 28th. We have met, we being myself and the 2 assistant chiefs have met with human resources to go through the process on the timeline. We are hopeful that we would be able to have at least the physical agility test and the written examination complete in December for a January start time for the academy. That's what we're planning for right now.
How many recruits are we looking for?
Right now, that number is 12.
Well, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And Chief, can you just tell us what the minimum requirements to be a Hartford firefighter?
Yes, sir. You have to be at least. Yes, sir. You have to be at least 18 years old, a Hartford resident at the time of application, which means if the deadline is Tuesday, September 28th at 5 p.m., Tuesday, September 28th at 5:01 p.m., you can literally move and your application still be acceptable. You also have to have a high school diploma or a GED. Those are the requirements.
Thank you. Council President?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. So, hello, Chief Doty, and hello, Chief Freeman. Chief Freeman, I wanted to say hi, but I couldn't unmute myself for some reason. Nice to see you guys on the screen. So, I had a couple of questions, Chief Freeman. How many women serve as of today in the fire department? Do you have those numbers? 18?
18, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then my second question is, have you seen an increase in calls for COVID response?
No,
I don't
ma'am.
know
We have
if you gave those
no, ma'am. We have not
statistics.
seen a yes, ma'am. We have not seen an increase. The numbers have, for us in the fire department, that number has remained around 2. With our regular meetings with AMR, as well as at the ASM Ambulance Service, St. Francis Hospital, and Hartford Hospital, their numbers also remain consistent. There is no increase in the treatment of COVID-19 patients or persons of interest. So we have not seen any increase whatsoever, knock on wood, here in the city for about 2 months now.
Okay, thank you. My other question is, there's a lot of talk that we're going to have a second round of COVID. I know there's been, some talk about that. Do we have any preparations in place if that does happen?
Yes, ma'am. We did, in preparation of the second wave, I did request authorization to procure 6 figures worth of N95 masks. That request was approved. That was specifically in response to anticipation of a second wave, which experts said that second wave could happen anywhere between August of 2020 or February of 2021. So we just wanted to make sure that we were prepared and had all of our ducks in a row prior to the second wave hitting. So all of our COVID-19 personal protective equipment, from masks to boot covers to gowns, we're all set.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes, ma'am.
Chief, I have a question. When you purchase PPEs for the entire city, as far as reporting of the purchasing of all PPEs, what is the required reporting mechanism?
So that's a great question, sir. So the process is a department head must fill out a form requesting PPE and or cleaning supplies. That form then goes to myself and Ms. Maritza in the Chief Operating Officer's office, and also Christina Catterfield, who is in charge of procuring any cleaning supplies. Once we receive that form out of our inventory, then we disseminate that request, or we call the department head back with questions, if there are any. Sometimes there are questions as to, you have a department of 22 people, why are you asking for 1,000 surgical masks? And, once that conversation is had and the department head gives their explanation, then we either grant their request or we compromise and come to an agreement on a number that's a lot more realistic. From there, if there are any other significant requests from a department, like for instance, I just got one today from Ms. Kim Oliver, who needs children's masks, and we have not bought thus far children's masks. So that conversation will be had between myself and Ms. Montanez, so I can get authorization to procure children's masks for our Department of Children and Family Services. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and also too, if you need help with trying to find a company that sells children masks, I can offer one to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I know Target, but, we're looking for.
I'm all about small businesses.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Any more questions for?
And speaking of that, sir, I'm glad you said I'm looking at a sticky now. There's a gentleman who I spoke with a few months ago who sells surgical masks, and he is a Hartford resident, and he has surgical masks on hand. So with our partnership with the Greater Hartford Arts Council, we will be making the procurement of the surgical mask from this gentleman, being that he is a minority-owned Hartford small business. So that's just an example of us paying attention to those details because it is vitally important.
Excellent. Excellent. Any more questions for Chief Freeman?
Yes, I have one more, Chief. Now that we're talking about small businesses, How many, what's the percentage of small businesses reached out to the HFD to get these masks and possibly hand sanitizer in the city of Hartford?
So when we had when the state, Mr. Councilman, had that program to where you contact the state, you fill out the information on their link, we literally handed out thousands of PPE to Hartford businesses. And they also, thousands got also cleaning supplies. Even more than that, we had other organizations, nonprofits, that would donate different pieces of PPE to us and cleaning supplies to us, and we disseminated that to other Hartford businesses who never signed up for any services. This is going back to prior to the phase 1 opening. And so between the state's program and then us as a city having a relationship that we have with our business owners, we were able to get thousands of pieces of PPE and cleaning supplies into our Hartford businesses who asked for it and those who didn't ask for it. But nevertheless, all were grateful.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Gill?
Yeah, thank you. Chief, I'm just wondering, if we look back over the last 6 months since this pandemic hit, what has been the trend, if any, with respect to our false alarms, our actual fires? I mean, have we seen activity go down because people are staying in their houses, or is it gone up, or is it no particular difference?
It went up slightly, Mr. Councilman, for the simple fact people are at home. People are at home when they would normally be at work. So we were looking at those data sets as headquarters very, very closely, and trying to come up with intervention initiatives in the event we had to do so. However, as soon as that spike went up, which was around May, it started to go back to normal data sets for what we could typically expect for calls for service, particularly for fires. And the result of that was simply because more people were at home. And it wasn't just fires, it was the utilization of the 911 system, period, because you got people at home and they would typically be at work. So there was an increase for calls for service throughout the last several months, Mr. Councilman, and that's not anything unique to Hartford. That's nationwide. Those trends speak to the fact of people being home and more calls for service were being executed because of that.
Any more questions? Seeing none, we will move on to the departmental report of the Chief of Police, Chief Jason Doty.
Thank you, Councilman, and good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Pleasure to be here, even virtually. So gave a little bit of an update on what we dealt with the ransomware, just generally looking at crime across the board. Again, as soon as I can get this CompStat package out, I will, and it will also be available online. We can't do that either right now. This year so far, we're seeing an overall 2.4% increase in Part 1 crime, and that number has fluctuated from down about 1 or 2% to up about 1 or 2% from week to week, depending on the week. But it's safe to say that we're overall about status quo where we were last year, with a few exceptions, notable exceptions. We have 4 less homicides this year than we did last year, so we're down 20% in the homicide category, down 20% in the sexual assault, rape category. We're up about 9% in the robbery category. Our 2 driving factors of crime that has gone up is auto theft. We've had 77 more auto thefts this year than we did last year, which accounts for a 22% increase, and that's the largest increase in Part 1 crime categories of any of them, followed by aggravated assault, which is up 10%, which equates to 58 more aggravated assaults this year than last year. Another troublesome category is our non-fatal shootings. We have 152 this year compared to 107 last year. We're up 45 incidents to date which is a notable increase. We think a lot of these cases, everyone's still evolving their theories about why not just Hartford, but New Haven and Bridgeport and cities across the country are seeing the increases in crime that we're seeing here. I don't have definitive answers for anyone other than, a lot of our auto theft activity is connected to our shooting activity. A lot of our younger folks that are stealing cars are getting involved in disputes with other younger folks that are stealing cars, and a lot of our auto thefts, especially with the juvenile population in the 16 to 17-year-old category, are also driving some of our shooting incidents as well. I've told the story before, but we've arrested a lot of juveniles when it comes to stolen cars, and it's the way that the system is set up right now, and where we are kind of in COVID world. It results in an infraction or a juvenile summons to be given to the juvenile or the juvenile's parents, or a combination of both, and they're kind of back at it again. And we've had some repeat arrests where juveniles have been arrested 2 and 3 times within a few days for stealing cars. So I think, it's over our head as far as how that's going to be addressed, but we definitely have to come to a better way of dealing with that. If there's good news, we're comparing 2020 to 2019. So we're comparing a relatively good year to another relatively good year. When you look back 2 years, we are down 23.4% in overall Part 1 crime from 2 years ago, 24% in overall Part 1 crime from 3 years ago, and 25% in overall Part 1 crime from 4 years ago. So, our trend, although we have some challenges in certain crime categories this year that we're addressing, our trend continues to go in the right direction in Part 1 crime. Significant now that we're getting back to some in-person NRZ meetings. I was down at Maple Avenue NRZ meeting last Thursday. What we're hearing from residents for concerns is mostly related to traffic safety, speeding, red light violations, stop sign violations. I think everyone, recognizes what the city did down on Flatbush and Saybrook with the traffic calming efforts of some of the speed humps that are down there, and those seem to have had a pretty good impact. Although we're getting some reports of neighboring streets where some of the speeders are just kind of detouring off of the main drag and speeding through some of the roads around there. So that's something that, we're going to work on as well. But, traffic safety really continues to be a priority. It is noticeably more difficult this year. Everything seems to be attributed to COVID, so we'll blame it on that. But I think generally there's less congestion and there's more of an ability for people to speed because there's less cars on the road and they're driving faster. And that's what, my colleagues around the state are seeing as well. There are, I was at an award ceremony yesterday, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MAD, presented us with an award, Hartford Police Department with an award. We are the #1 enforcer of operating under the influence for the last year. We came in first place for any police department with over 100 officers. And 2 of our individual officers, Sergeant Suarez and Officer Budwitz, were also individually recognized for their efforts in DUI enforcement. Because of those increases in DUI enforcement, we also see an increase in grant money. Our grants from the state for operating under the influence have gone from $80,000 to $300,000. We were able to procure a vehicle for OUI enforcement. Drunk driving is a significant concern when it comes to traffic safety. We've got some other measures like speed signs and speed carts on the way that we've purchased to try to further just kind of calm the traffic. But we've, our traffic division responds to all of the requests within the city and the neighborhoods to do enforcement. We get to all of them, but we can't be there all the time. We'll send officer out, to a certain street, and we'll do an enforcement on a given day. And then, we move on to another street, and within a few days, we're getting calls for them to return. So we're doing our best to cover the entire city, to make sure that folks see us out there and see us enforcing traffic. But that is probably the number one concern, at least in the last month, now that fireworks have somewhat calmed down. This is the next issue that we're dealing with. And some of these vehicles that are driving recklessly in the city are most certainly stolen vehicles. That is our number one leader in Part 1 crime right now, is stolen motor vehicles. A lot of them are from out of town. They have the key fobs in them. We've run, in conjunction with the Connecticut Chiefs Association, we've run advertising campaigns notifying people to lock their cars, not leave their keys in their cars. But as the weather gets colder, that problem tends to increase. Folks are leaving their cars running when they run into the store, or when they get gas, or when they, grab a coffee, and those cars have a tendency to get stolen while they're in there. And unfortunately, sometimes they're even occupied by pets and or kids. So we're going to do another push this fall to try to get the word out, to lock the doors, shut the cars off, take the fobs with you, not leave your cars unattended while they're running. But that's kind of the general overview. I can go into any specifics.
So I do have a question, Chief. So the owners of these vehicles that leave the fobs in there, is there any kind of accountability on them, finding them, giving them a warning as far as, so they can understand they can't leave those fobs in their vehicles, regardless of where they live? No
criminal culpability. They can be. I have heard cases where they could be, held liable. But that's not my expertise. But not any criminal liability.
That is correct. I had a case where there was negligent maintenance of the vehicle, meaning allowing someone to do something, being careless.
Okay, thank you. Now, Councilman Mickton, you have a question? Hold on. Okay, you're muted now.
Okay. Just following up on what Councilman Sanchez asked, Chief, do you have a sense of like the percentage, if you know, of the car thefts that are that kind of thing with the key left in versus, smashed window, dent puller kind of thefts?
I would say, based on the reports I see, that it's a significant number. I don't know if there's a way to delve in, because a lot of our, what I can give you, and I will give it to you if I have it here. There was a couple parts of the CompStat package that didn't come out. What I can give you is stolen cars recovered in Hartford that are stolen from outside of Hartford versus cars that are stolen inside of Hartford. The ones outside of Hartford are almost 100% keys left in, fob issues. And it is, I believe the last time I looked at it, it's almost twice as many stolen outside of Hartford, recovered inside of Hartford. But I'll get you that info. And if there's a way to delve into whether it had the fob in it or not, I'll check on that as well. I think some of that comes down to how thorough the outside town is in reporting, the stolen car. Because the stolen car report actually comes into the outside town. And then a lot of times we'll recover the car here in Hartford. But I'll see if I can get into that question. Sure.
A related question to that. I know you said, talking about all the major crime increases, that they sort of mirror nationwide trends. Is that also true of these car thefts?
Yes. We talk pretty regularly, especially Waterbury, Bridgeport, New Haven, and us. We're on the phone on a pretty regular basis to try to think of, not reinvent the wheel and figure out what's working in other places. We just recently sat down with New Britain Police Department. They're dedicating 6 officers to an auto theft task force. We have 4 plus the state task force dedicated here. We sat down with them to tell them how we've been successful in recovering these cars. I'll send out individually a couple of reports. We've done, what we tried to do was connect some of the individuals involved in auto theft and violent crime. And we've done some specialized details over the last 2 weeks in fact, not to give up too much, but there's another one occurring today where we're not just targeting auto theft, but auto theft that we believe is related to violent crime. And we've made some significant arrests. And I dare knock on wood, but we've had a couple more quiet weekends. So I think that we might be onto something there. You know, every time we find something new to do, something evolves, and we have to think of something different. But it is undoubtedly a national trend. And in fact, when you look at the percent increase in numbers, you know, again, I knock on wood when I say this, but we're doing a little better than other places. You know, when it comes to the auto theft increase and when it comes to some of the violent crime increases.
Can I ask one more? And this is actually, I'm not, you brought up the question of the reckless driving and speed humps, and it might actually be a question better for Chief Freeman, but I put it to the both of you because after our resident was killed on Weathersfield Ave not so long ago, I've been hearing from constituents a lot about that. And what I understand is we can't have speed bumps and speed humps on the big streets like Weathersfield and the places where the fire trucks would go through. But I just wonder, yeah, this is probably more a question for Chief Freeman, but I wonder, because I've been trying to read about it and do research, are there speed humps or other things that we could be doing on those main thoroughfares? I mean, in addition to enforcement, that could slow traffic but not significantly impact ambulance and fire response times that you all know of?
Yes, Mr. Councilman, through you, Mr. Chair. So, you know, that's a great question. And, you know, what I mention a lot to citizens or to anyone for that matter is that Hartford is very unique in our threats from a public safety standpoint, specifically speaking for the fire department. Out of our 17 communities, we have 5 different general locations to where we are overpopulated. And overpopulated means we have 7,600 people per square square mile. That's a lot of people. And when you add the challenge of multifamily homes or even apartment buildings, that is what drives the necessity to have the resources that we have in the fire department. But to your point, Mr. Councilman, when, as Chief Doty mentioned, when we put the traffic calming measures on Flatbush, any other circumstances, I would have raised my hand and said, I have a grievance. But knowing our challenges in this city, the pain that a lot of families have felt from these motor vehicle accidents, I cooperated. I figured let's see what impact there's going to be on our response. And if there isn't any, that's great. You know, the fire department is not slowed down significantly, and our residents and our community is going to be a lot safer. So that was me, you know, trying to do my best to do our part as fire emergency services to help the city. But traditionally, that's one thing that a fire chief would be jumping up and down in his or her seat saying, no, you can't do that. But we remain quiet, and we're opting to see how this works out before we move on to other parts of the city, because there is an impact to response with the apparatus. But Mr. Councilman, we're willing to do our part to try to help fix this problem that we have. And you have your constituents that come talk to you, and then you also have your firefighters who are actually out there on scene seeing the results of these terrible accidents. And it's certainly my job to do any and everything I can to help from stopping those incidents from happening.
I appreciate that, Chief. Do you have a sense of when do you feel like you would have a sense of, you know, you could say yes or no, take Flatbush Avenue, for example, like how long do you give it before you say, all right, this is slowing us down too much, or it's not?
Yes, sir. So once I have the company officers that actually traverse, you know, that area, and even maybe our tour commanders, and get the feedback from the men and women to say, hey, what was the impact, if any? And they say, yeah, no, Chief, we're good. or yeah, chief, my head about hit the ceiling when we hit the bump, or we didn't see, there wasn't enough signage or warning. So, we came up on it real fast, had to slam on our brakes. So once we respond to that area a few times, and I would be able to get the feedback from the men and women, is when we would be able to give thumbs up, thumbs down on the impact. Doesn't mean that we still won't move forward in other areas, but just to confirm that there's no adverse impact on the fire department, I'd say, Mr. Councilman, certainly within the next three to 4 weeks.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, sir.
So I have a question for both, Chief. What do you think about the rumble strips? You think that'll be more effective than having a speed bump?
I mean,
for
so
fire, be more desirable for fire. Yes, sir.
Okay. And
I am good with either. I think, anybody that's driven down, Ledyard and down in that area where they did, especially the zigzagging of the rumble strips. I mean, it's difficult to not be impacted by hitting those rumble strips. I think those are a good idea. Our cars tend to, go from, speed to stop, back to speed a little quicker than a massive fire truck. So I think that the speed humps impact us a little less. But at the end of the day, just like Chief Freeman said, we have to do something. From a mere enforcement perspective, I don't have enough, people to put in all of these, as we've talked about before, with both you, Councilman Sanchez, and Council President Rosado and Councilman Clark, being able to cover these places nonstop to really have an impact in long-term deterrence of speeding is really not reasonable. So I'm all for the physical ways to slow it down, understanding that Chief Freeman and the ambulance service have got a little bit of a different thing to deal with. But I like the rumble strips. I think they're good.
thank you. Any more questions, Councilman Gale?
Thank you. Not a question. I'm actually going to respond to Councilman Mictum's question to mention what I think a lot of us know and what both chiefs alluded to, and that is the various ways that we are now thinking about designing our roads to slow traffic down to, some of our roads. I mean, Main Street, for instance, right out my window here in places is 6 lanes wide with nothing. And when you get there at 10 o'clock at night and there's not a car, for half a mile ahead of you, you can just let loose and some of these guys come down here and will just take off. And the same thing happens on Weathersfield Avenue where, you may have 4 lanes wide, and we do have left turn lanes. We have a lot of striping, but I do think that the planners now are recognizing that when you're putting in selective islands here and there, you're bumping out curbs in different places, that this has a real dramatic effect to slowing down traffic. It's just more difficult and you don't conceptualize that you have a wide open area. It certainly presents a challenge for the fire department, but I suppose once they get to know the area, they know the bump outs and they can deal with it. But so I look forward. I'm encouraged. I don't know to what extent my council colleagues are aware. We're in the process of redesigning Main Street right now. It's hopefully a very dramatic redesign that is going to push out the curb in various places. It's going to create a bike lane with another island, so it's going to really reduce the lanes of traffic. Where you're going to have 1 lane in each direction with a turn lane instead of 2 lanes in each direction, sometimes 3 lanes in each direction. So those are certainly things, and I've also I don't even know exactly what this is, but I'm fairly certain Aaron Gill and the Frog Hollow group are working on some traffic calming measures around Babcock, Putnam and Lawrence and Capitol Avenue, where we also had a very bad accident with a pedestrian that got hit by speeding cars. And he has something that he's proposed that's, I think, somewhat unique, but will hopefully assist in this. So lots to do in that, lots to do, lots to think about there. As Chief Thody said, you're always trying to get 1 step ahead, but you find yourself 1 step behind too often.
Just to piggyback on that real quick, at the Marge meeting the other day, they unveiled a redesign down in like Maple Ave and Fairfield Ave, down in that corridor somewhere. And they did some cool things. They did talk about narrowing the streets. So Chief Freeman, I thought about you when they said they were going to narrow the streets, because those trucks are not getting any smaller. But they're putting the bike lane on the inside of the on-street parking. So you'll have a bike lane and then on-street parking and then the travel lane, which when, Weathersfield Avenue, that was a bicyclist that got hit. I thought that was kind of a unique idea, to kind of use the parked cars to protect the bike lane. I mean, I don't know how long that would take for us to do across the city, but I thought that was kind of a cool concept.
Yeah.
I also like to add, I'm not sure if anyone's seen the construction going on Sigourney Street and Russ Street as you come off the highway there. So that's going to be a roundabout. And that same type of idea or thought of a roundabout is most likely be incorporated on Main Street, Albany Avenue, and Ann Street in that area. And also we're looking at incorporating that kind of construction on New Britain Avenue, where New Britain Avenue and Mountain Street is at, and New Britain Avenue and Newington, which is a very large intersection where our children has to cross, New Britain Avenue is extremely wide. So that's another point that we may be looking at and doing a roundabout. But take a look at Sigourney Street. It's awesome. It's looking great. And by the way, that's the state. The city worked with the state, but that's a state road and that's a state project.
I think maybe as a committee, we should think about putting a joint resolution together for the administration to put another traffic calming study done, commission a traffic calming study for our most vulnerable communities that are subject to high-speed traffic. We mentioned New Britain Avenue, Weathersfield Avenue. I've been on Tower Avenue, Barber Street, Blue Hills Avenue,
Homestead. I've heard people talk about Homestead a lot.
Homestead
Right.
as well.
Long strip.
Depending on, it's a long strip now, depending, because between the Albany intersection and Woodland, that has been repaved, and so it is now a fast lane. And so these are some of the areas I think that we should be help to be focused on as to how we will move forward for the safety standpoint, protection of our residents and citizens, on making sure that there's some type of traffic calming measures in place. We can't expect our police department to post up on every and busy intersection. We just don't have enough manpower for the traffic division to be there. But there's got to be some type of way. Maybe we can also lobby our federal Connecticut delegation to secure funds from the Federal Department of Transportation, come to the state, to the Department of Public Works, for us to do something with the next Congress coming in.
We'll get together, right? Draft something out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent idea. I think putting something forward like that would then give us the opportunity to bring development services in, and let the planning department tell you just what they, in a perfect world, what they'd love to do. Because I'm sure that we've got folks there that would love to design these things, but then you run into the reality of who's got the money.
Right. It's always
they've got the designs, but
they've got the design, but it's just the dollars for the planning, right. And then the also to the architectural plans as well that need to be paid for. And I think, as I know, development services is moving forward with certain projects within certain areas of our city. I think this can be a game changer from this committee to introduce something and for us to actually, as Councilman Gale said, bring in development services, and let's bring in some other partners to get some things moving.
Do you think it makes sense in that regard in terms of that resolution? I also think it's an excellent idea for this committee maybe to develop a list of what are, the top 3 or 5 sort of priority corridors like you were just listing, and then be able to obviously, there's other limitations, money, each street is different, but for us to ask the administration, ultimately for the council to say, we would really like you to prioritize these corridors.
Yes, yeah, I think so.
I
Councilman Kale.
I would think we should get, in coming up with our priorities, let's make sure we get a lot of input from Chief Thody and Chief Freeman, because they've got the
Absolutely.
statistical backup
Yeah.
to tell us,
I don't often like to volunteer for extra work, but we could, we could definitely break down car crashes, where our traffic division is getting the most speeders, our DUI enforcement. Those corridors all could be, without the expense of a traffic study, I think you could get a lot of good information. And listen, all you have to do is answer your phone for a week. You know where most of the streets are that are getting it the worst. So I think we could come up with something for sure.
And let's be clear, there might be certain intersections that may need some road reconstruction. Could be some intersections whereby it just be simply putting in a stop sign to cut the speed, assuming that folks would actually obey the stop sign. But it could it can help to create a more safer vehicle behavior, driving behavior.
I believe BCCO, the nonprofit organization below SAMA, I believe they have a somewhat of a traffic study already completed, but it has to do with pedestrian and bicyclists.
Yes,
And
right.
hopefully we can take that and incorporate that into the next study. I'd like to move on to a question, as to Chief Thody's favorite subject. How's the flash mob? How are we handling the flash mob lately?
So the two, we kind of see two variations of that. One is the street racers and one is the actual parties that we're starting to see, that we've continued to see. Street racers we've done pretty well with in partnering with DMV and some of the other efforts we've talked about in the past through enforcement and presence and shutting streets down. Sometimes this last weekend, unfortunately, are without really, I guess I'll say without me noticing that it was coming, our food truck time limitation, 9 o'clock curfew expired. So Thea worked over the weekend with Howard Rifkin, and they got that extended. So we'll be able to enforce that again. So we had a little bit of an issue on Weathersfield Ave and down that corridor, Franklin Ave, with the food trucks. They knew it had expired, but we didn't. So, but generally speaking, the street racers it's been a lot better. They pop in once in a while. We use social media to sit down with some of the organizers, and we told them that, that we could seek to, to arrest them for a felony if they were promoting these events that turn into huge events that are a real risk to public safety. So a lot of them are younger folks that don't want to deal with that, and they were pretty reasonable with us and stopped promoting those events. And we saw an increase in peacefulness in the south end, especially the southeast corridor, because of that. The pop-up parties are still a problem. It's like playing whack-a-mole. We deal with one in one certain area, and then it pops up somewhere else. Again, we'll be submitting an arrest warrant this week for a property that's been warned, that's had the letters from Chief Freeman, and Liani. Health and Human Services, and they're still defying the order. We went back and forth with the state's attorney on what kind of enforcement we can do, but we believe we have a tactic to go after the folks that are allowing these to occur and promoting the parties. Because once they get to be 500 people or 1,000 people, you just can't make it disperse in 5 minutes. It turns into a real mess. But it has gotten better. We've gotten a lot of positive emails in some of the locations. Have done a decent job, and when it does pop up, we've been able to stop it in that one area, so it impacts one neighborhood for only a brief period of time, and then it moves. But it's definitely still an ongoing challenge. I think it will be until things open up, which is not a good idea right now. Everyone else is increasing their COVID numbers, and as Chief Freeman said, it seems to be holding strong. So I'm not advocating for that, but I think until people, have the ability to go out and do something else, they will find a way to congregate. And, the recent announcement of the new fines and things like that, I just don't think that we're going to be able to combat it with the use of fines, but that remains to be seen.
So this past Sunday, I'm not sure if you received the video. I was in the middle of one of those pop-up party or flash mob. Now I walked towards the Advanced Auto, which is the business that they were, all congregating in besides the street. And on their wall, there was a plaque of no trespassing and no partying or hangout, what have you. But what wasn't there is a plaque on towing. Would it be helpful if they also added a plaque for towing, let's say from Friendlies or what have you? And then does that give the HPD the right to go on their property and start ticketing and towing or tagging or what have you?
No, Natalie will probably jump in here, but that's private property tows are just that. The private property tows. The business owners have the ability to contract with somebody to tow unauthorized users unauthorized parkers off their property if they're properly placarded, and they can contract with Friendlies or Coronas or any of them to come and tow. But we can't tow off private property unless there's another reason, if the car was used in a crime and we're seizing it or something like that. But that's not our purview. We've worked with those businesses up and down Wethersfield Avenue. Again, this weekend, because the food truck issue was, lapsed, we had a problem there. But it has been quiet in weekends prior to that.
So, being that we can't go on private property, can the owner of that property call the police if they say they have a group of cars don't want to leave their parking lot? Is that at that point, can they call HPD to have them removed?
They can for trespassing, but like I said, this Wethersfield Avenue problem is not new. This has been going on now for a while. Even before COVID, it was a problem. It was never as big as it is now, but it was a problem. And those businesses, people aren't there at night. You talk about
right.
The auto parts stores that are there. There's a couple businesses there along that Wethersfield corridor, just north of Brown. That for some reason attracts people to congregate. It attracts the food trucks. And we have tried to work with the private properties there for lighting, fencing. There's a couple of vacant lots there where we were able to reach out to owners that were as far away as New York and California to put up fencing so that the cars couldn't get into the open lots. But, those fences over time get taken down. There's a property there that's being developed. It's tough. It's an ongoing battle working with property owners and doing parking enforcement and closing that corridor. It's a shame that we have to close a street to control that kind of behavior, because people live on those streets. And the people that live on that corridor come out all the time and talk with the cops. I stopped by a few weeks ago just to kind of check in. And, a young girl came out and she was playing with the lights in my car. And the people there appreciate seeing us there. But it's an interesting problem to deal with. And like I said, we had it on the run, and then we lost the traction with the food trucks, and it kind of blew up on us this weekend. But it should be back to normal again.
Okay, I don't mean to hog up the time, but there is another issue going on that it seems to has been building up again, and this is the Johns and the prostitution going on. Further south on Wethersfield Avenue near where it used to be Costa del Sol, that area. What are we doing about that now as far as the prostitution?
So you have walk beats down in that area, but prostitution is, predominantly a community court offense, and community court's not in session right now. So we work in our diversionary program in HAP to bring our social service workers out there, and we try to bring folks that are involved in prostitution with our social workers. But from a merely an enforcement situation, it's a misdemeanor summons to go to a court that's not open. So we are doing that, but much like juvenile problem is a little bigger problem because there is no juvenile detention facilities anymore. But the court system problem when it comes to the community court, I've said it a bunch of times, we need as many voices as we can, whether it be city council or whoever it might be, to get back to opening up the courts, especially the community court. To assume that that's not essential and it's been closed this long. We continue to go out there. We continue to make arrests. but none of them are being adjudicated in court. And a lot of the services, especially that prostitutes get, are coming out of Tom O'Brien and community court. They become a captive audience in community court, and they're able to provide them with services, and it helps. It significantly helps. But right now, people know that our summonses are a piece of paper that mean you might see court in 6 months, and that's not having a deterring effect.
Right.
We're having the same problem with the panhandler. The panhandlers get misdemeanor summons to go to community court. There is no community court. It's not open. That is a frustrating cycle for our police officers. And Tom O'Brien came to the Marge meeting and acknowledged that, and he wants to go back. So I think we just need to continue to apply pressure. Courts are essential, and they have to open. Especially the community court. The GA14 Part A, they're hearing cases on a limited basis, but our volume, as we've talked about, auto theft, some of these areas of crime that are up, we are still making arrests and making good cases, but they're not. It's not that they're getting thrown out of court; they just can't get to court. That's a problem.
That's a major problem. Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Councilman Mickham.
Thank you. Just Chief Doty, I'm sorry, one other question that some of those questions reminded me of. And I know we've asked you and Assistant Chief Medina about this, but it continues to be my observation just moving around the city that the police are not wearing their masks. And it's when we asked Assistant Chief Medina about it, he sort of made a distinction between, when they have to hop out of their car in a hurry and run, which understandably other priorities. But what I've observed, and I mean, I'm talking about literally today, what I observed was 2 traffic details with no masks and an officer out of his car. He was just talking to a woman on the street with no mask. Those were all the officers I saw out of their car. Now, obviously that's a snapshot, but I'm hearing from a lot of constituents the same thing, that officers are not wearing masks. And in fact, when civilians say to them, why aren't you wearing a mask? They kind of just brush it off. So I wonder what, if any, efforts are going on within the department to make the rank and file take that seriously.
So a couple things, one, it is policy that they wear masks. If some of the traffic details that we've gotten snapshots of are a cop standing in the middle of the street, next to an open hole with no one within 15 feet of him. That doesn't fall under the mask requirement. I think a lot of people see a cop in a uniform and not in a mask, and they immediately take a picture and they send it to me, which is fine. But a lot of the pictures are basically a cop standing by themselves, not talking to anybody, not interacting with anybody, and you're not mandated to wear a mask at that point. So there's that. And then there's also cops that are talking to people with no masks on. I'm reviewing more and more body-worn camera footage as we look at complaints and other issues within the department and try to fix some of the things we got going on here. And I see the same thing. We are doubling down now, especially that there's going to be a mandate where essentially a ticket can be given for not wearing a mask. I mean, this was kind of this gray area. We've also not taken enforcement against the citizens with the mask issue because it's just, I don't see that as a good use of police resources. I don't see it as a good way to build trust with the community where we're making arrests or giving out tickets for wearing masks. That seems to be now getting ratcheted up by the governor, and we'll have to have some conversations about how we deal with that. But today we put out a directive where maybe it's we need, I guess, I don't want to make light of this subject, but maybe we need cooler masks, right? So one of our internal groups, it's not the FOP, it's the I'll think of which one it is before I jump off the call here, but ordered the masks where you can kind of pull them down around your neck or pull them up. They're a nicer material. And they have our patch, the Hartford police patch, right in front. They're kind of nice looking. They match the uniform. Those were authorized by me today, and they came in today. We had been in discussions with some folks about trying to get some nicer masks in here where officers can kind of wear them with pride a little bit. That goes a lot with our uniform. So we're going to try that. And frankly, we'll put out another directive now that The governor has ratcheted up the seriousness of masks, and we'll have to start taking disciplinary action against our officers. It's not a step that I really wanted to take, but I think we've been in this pandemic long enough now, and it's not just police officers. I see, I see a lot of others out there in the city that should be wearing them and aren't. But it should be incumbent upon us to at least set an example. So I think we are going to have to take it a little more seriously, and it just, it pains me to have to take it to that level, because I think I certainly have gotten used to wear this thing everywhere. I caught myself, driving around with it on the other day. So we'll continue our efforts, but I have seen, unfortunately, officers that should be wearing them not wearing them. I agree. So we'll hope that these new masks, hopefully prompt some voluntary compliance. And now there's really no excuse. You've got this nice mask to wear. The Chief Freeman has done a great job of keeping us stocked with PPE. There's never been a shortage of masks on our end. In the very beginning we did, but never since the mandates have gone out. Chief Freeman's kept us well stocked. So more to come.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Chief. Thank you, counselors. Thank you, Chief Freeman. Thank you, Attorney Natalie Fiola-Guerrieri. And this shall conclude this month's meeting of the Quality Life and Public Safety Council Committee meeting.